gotten down to verse 24. As we touch on each verse in our study through Genesis, the flood has come upon the earth, and Noah and his family are all shut up safe and snug within the ark that they have built. In verse 24, let's pick up our study, our journey, where there we read, the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Now, this presents to us a debatable issue. Maybe that's not the right word, but anyway, a discussing issue, elaborating on exactly what's taking place, because we've already read that where it says it rained 40 days and 40 nights. 40 days and 40 nights. Well, again, God's in control of the weather as well as this planet Earth. But it is interesting that the waters prevailed 150 days. For 5 months, the waters have prevailed. We know, of course, by what we know here on Earth, when storms come and rains come, and we've just experienced that 2 terrible hurricanes here in America. Even if it rains until there are flash floods that fill an area, it doesn't last very long. Even if it rains several inches, it doesn't last very long. But here it says, the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. I want to share with you some comments from 3 different commentaries, at least, in regards to this verse. First of all, there's Hall's. In his comment, he said, the waters violently overwhelmed all the earth, counting from the beginning of those 40 days wherein the rain fell, unto the end of 150 days, for the full space of 5 months. Excuse me. And then there's Bishop Loth. He writes, these words seem to me to import that whatsoever short intermissions there might be, yet the rain continued 150 days. Otherwise, it is hard to explain how the waters increased more and more, as it is said, verses 17, 18, and 19. Besides, had the rain ended, as we commonly suppose, at 40 days, and the waters could not have prevailed 150 days, but would have sunk much before that time by reason of the declivity of the earth. And yet they were so far from falling that the tops of mountains were not seen till the beginning of the 10th month. That is, 270 days were passed. And then one more, Adam Clark. He writes, the breaking up of the fountains of the great deep and the raining 40 days and nights had raised the waters 15 cubits above the highest mountains, after which 40 days it appears to have continued at this height for 150 days more. So, says Dr. Lightfoot, these 2 sums are to be reckoned distinct, and not the 40 days included in the 150. So that when the 150 days were ended, there were 6 months and 10 days of the flood passed. Again, the comments from 3 different commentators. Anyway, I'm going to let the experts, quote unquote experts, define the meaning of this verse. But one thing remains. The waters remained and the waters prevailed over the earth, the entire globe, for 150 days, or 5 months, if you will. But it would be much, much longer than that before the ark would find its final resting place, and before Noah had left the ark with the animals. We find that in the next chapter. Let me share with you an article from the Creation magazine, June and August of 1999. The Creation magazine. Many Christians today think the flood of Noah's time was only a local flood, confined to somewhere around Mesopotamia. This idea comes not from Scripture, but from the notion of billions of years of Earth's history. But look at the problems this concept involves. If the flood was local, why did Noah have to build an ark? He could have walked to the other side of the mountains and missed it. If the flood were local, why did God send the animals to the ark so that they would escape death? There would have been other animals to reproduce that kind if these had died. If the flood was local, why was the ark big enough to hold all kinds of animals, or all kinds of vertebrate animals that have ever existed? If only Mesopotamian animals were aboard, the ark could have been much smaller. If the flood were local, why would birds have been sent on board? These could simply have winged across to the nearby mountain range. And they go on in their argument. If the flood were local, how could the waters rise to 15 cubits above the mountains? Water seeks its own level. It could not rise to cover the local mountains while leaving the rest of the world untouched. If the flood were local, people who did not happen to be living in the vicinity would not be affected by it. They would have escaped God's judgment on sin if this happened. What did Christ mean when he likened the coming judgment of all men to the judgment of all men in the days of Noah? A partial judgment in Noah's day means a partial judgment to come. If the flood were local, God would have repeatedly broken his promise never to send such a flood again. And then that's the end of the opinions or the thoughts from this magazine. But anyway, belief in a worldwide flood, and I think the scriptures clearly indicate that, it, I think, has the backing of common sense and the backing of science, and obviously the backing of Jesus Christ himself, because he made reference to this flood during his ministry. So that's the summation, if you will, of chapter 7. We jump on to chapter 8 because it's really just a continuation, just broken down into chapters by those who decided we need chapters and verses in our Bible. But anyway, verse 1 of chapter 8, and God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark, and God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. God remembered Noah. The Living Torah tells it like this, or says it like this: God gave special thought to Noah. Now, we're not, of course, to take this statement seriously in the sense that God forgot Noah during that period of time. Of course, God's not capable of forgetting, or if you will, remembering, in the sense that you and I are. Mr. Henry, Matthew Henry, makes what I think is an interesting comment here. He writes, the whole race of mankind, except Noah and his family, was now extinguished and driven into the land of forgetfulness, to be remembered no more. So that God's remembering Noah was the return of his mercy to mankind, of whom he would not make a full end. It is a strange expression. Ezekiel 5:13, when I have accomplished my fury with them, I will be comforted. The demands of divine judgment, justice, excuse me, excuse me, the demands of divine justice had been answered by the ruin of those sinners. He had eased him of his adversaries, Isaiah 1 verse 24. And now his spirit was quieted, Zechariah 6 and 8. And he remembered Noah and every living thing. He remembered mercy in wrath, Habakkuk 3 and verse 2. Remembered the days of old, Isaiah 63 and verse 11. Remembered the holy seed, and then remembered Noah. The words of Mr. Henry, I enjoyed that. God made a wind to pass over the earth. Now, let's imagine a world that's covered with water, that's several feet deep, even to cover mountains, however they may have been tall at that time. And the water had prevailed upon the world for 150 days. Now, this must have been a special wind, like a hurricane maybe, or a tornado, but a special wind that God sent through the world that had tremendous drying effects to pull waters sucked back out into the heavens maybe, as well as probably open up the crevices of the earth to swallow the water into internal cavities, as well as drying up the water on the top side. We're imagining here. But anyway, in verse 2 it says, the fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. Now, even this verse, I know we get back to the previous chapter about the 40 days and 40 nights. Even this verse seems to infer that the rains continued, because notice it says the rain from heaven was restrained. So what had brought about such a large amount of water that covered either mountains is now stopped, as it were, by the providence of God. John Gill in his comment says the rain from heaven was restrained, which seems to confirm what has been before observed, that after the rain of 40 days and nights, it ceased not to rain, more or less, though not so vehemently, until the end of 150 days, and then it entirely ceased. The words of Mr. Gill. In verse 3, the waters returned from off the earth continually. And after the end of 150 days, the waters were abated. So we got some connections here we got to deal with concerning what all's involved with this 150 days in which the rain from heaven was restrained. Now, just as the waters were brought upon the earth by the hand of God, so they were removed from the earth in a short period of time by the hand of God. Return, the writer says, return from off the earth, which I find it an interesting expression, implying to me that the waters went back to where they came from. Or it seems that could be a way of looking at it. Strong's defined the Hebrew word shub, a primitive word to turn back, hence away, transitively or intransitively, literally or generally to retreat. So it seems from what we're reading here, the water's going back where they came from. Could we speak both into the heavenlies, because that's where they've come from when it rained, and also into, as we mentioned previously, the crevices, the water beneath? Again, interesting to me. In verse 4, it says, the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. Now, again, we have different views, as we usually do in our studies of the scriptures, particularly in our journey through the book of Genesis. There are different views about the just where this resting place on Ararat is located, even to the degrees that there are stories of those who've claimed that they've not only located it, but also they've gone aboard, or they've wandered through the ruins. I recently even saw, I don't remember now where it was, but recently saw a claim that they were able to trace or find the image of the ark, what remained of the ark, on a mountain there somewhere in the land of Turkey, I believe. But anyway, the ark rested in the 7th month. Dr. Clark, let me borrow again from him, Adam Clark. He said that Ararat was a mountain of Armenia, is almost universally agreed. What is commonly thought to be the Ararat of the scriptures has been visited by many travelers, and on it there are several monasteries. For a long time, the world has been amused with the reports that the remains of the ark were still visible there. But Mr. Tournefort, a famous French naturalist who was on the spot, assures us that nothing of the kind is there to be seen, as there is a great chain of mountains which are called by this name. It is impossible to determine on what part the ark rested, but the highest part, called by some the Finger Mountain, has been fixed on as the most likely place. These things we must leave, and they are certainly of very little consequence. Mr. Clark. Let me again borrow from David Guzik. In a sense, Mount Ararat was not a very smart place to leave the ark. Leaving the ark on a high altitude and mountainous terrain meant a difficult departure for everyone and everything in the ark. However, if God's purpose was to put the ark in a place where it might be preserved for thousands of years, he chose an excellent place for it. The end of quote. Well, Mr. Guzik, Mr. Clark, and everybody else, God knew what he was doing when he did it. And he never makes a mistake. So regardless of the comments and regardless of the pros and the cons, and regardless of those that you see published in newspapers, magazines that claim to be the ark or the remains, it still will remain in people's minds and thoughts whether this is the way it actually happened or not. What we have is what's recorded in our Bible, and we believe what the Bible says. The waters decreased, verse 5 says, continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen. So almost 3 months after the ark settles down on this Mount Ararat, Noah is able to, or we assume from this verse at least, to see the mountaintops in the area where the ark is resting. He's got this window. One writer thinks it's all the way around practically the ark. But anyway, in verse 6, it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. And then verse 7, and he sent forth a raven that went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. So Noah is interested now into what his surroundings are, where he is. Obviously, after all this period of time, wherever it was that Noah built that ark, wherever it was, the territory, topographic area, is completely different now. Noah could be a half a mile, or he could be a few yards from where he left. We don't know, of course, and Noah wouldn't know. But regardless of how far he traveled in that ark, he settled down on a brand new earth, as it were, that's completely cleansed. And now the hills, the mountaintops are coming down as the coming up as the water begins to assuage. Noah waits for another month before he opens that window, or at least sends that raven out to check on his surroundings. And if the waters had abated to the point that whether he could leave the ark, whether it's time to get out of this boat that they've been in for a year, over a year, it will be eventually. Mr. Hawker, let me share a couple more commentaries. Mr. Hawker writes, opening the window of the ark and sending forth the messengers of inquiry serves to teach no less that while faith is in the liveliest exercise in waiting for the fulfillment of the divine promises, it is no impeachment of faith, but on the contrary, the truest proof of its being genuine, that we humbly send forth the inquiries of prayer and supplications for the time of the Lord's deliverance from trouble. Proverbs 30 and verse 4, Psalms chapter 135 and verse 7. Borrow another quote from Mr. Gill, John Gill. He said, and he sent forth a raven, that by it he might make his observation how high or low the waters were upon the earth. And the rather he sent out the raven, a bird of prey, which feeds on carrion, that if the earth had been dry, the smell of the dead carcasses would have invited it to go far off from the ark and not return. And if not, he would see it again. Interesting. That's, again, the comments of John Gill, which adds a little bit information or thoughts concerning exactly why did Noah send a raven first? Why did he put that raven out and see what would happen? And I don't know the better argument than what Mr. Gill gives us, because it makes sense that if the flood had not lasted as long as it had, then obviously there would be remains there. Carrion, as it's referred to, remains of the dead animals. And what a stench it would be that would cover the area. And that would be a good reason for the raven, because of the manner in which the raven flies and the raven lives and conducts himself, went to and fro until the waters were dried up. That's interesting. He just kept going. Now, we're not to, I don't think we are at least, to assume that the raven, he just kept on flying, that he didn't stop flying. He just flew around and around and around because it found no place to land. It would be several more days before the dove would be sent forth by Noah, which would find land at last, dry land, if you will, or land, period. While the raven was never taken back into the ark. This is not to say, at least that's my opinion, it was not to say that the raven didn't come back and land on the ark. The raven, the type of bird it was, it's unlike the dove. The dove could be domesticated. The doves are domesticated. And animals like that, pigeon, for instance, that fits into a similar category as a dove, are tameable, if you will, domesticate. But the raven, not as much so. Mr. Clark, he touched on this when he wrote, "Indeed, this must be allowed, as it is impossible she could have continued 21 days upon the wing, which she must have done had she not returned. But the text itself is sufficiently determined." So the words of Mr. Clark. But anyway, we continue looking at Noah. The ark is stopped. I wonder, during this 100 plus days, well, more than 100, for over a year, over 300 days, that the ark has been bobbing up and down, as it were, on the waters, and now it has stopped. Which I wonder the reaction of Noah and the family there. I wonder the reaction of the animals. And one thing, one thought as well in my mind, when I read this story, this lesson here for us, that I never saw touched on by any of the commentators that we've been making reference to, is the reaction of the animals. Can you imagine all the large animals, hippopotamus and whatever, that were in that ark, the bears, wild and ferocious, but obviously in that ark, they were not in that condition. God must have ever either put them to sleep or tamed them, whatever. But it's interesting to me, all this that's going on here, and again, had to be taken care of for a year plus a year, that Noah and his family had to feed the animals, must have had to feed them for that. But again, this is one of those things that, in my mind, that we don't find any reference to in the scriptures, is to the condition that existed during this journey, that Noah and his family endured for over a year, and these animals endured as well. There must have been, I say there must have been, there could have been a lot of noise, a lot of howling, a lot of barking, a lot of growling, a lot of noise going on in that ark. There could have been. But again, maybe God put them to sleep. God may have put them to sleep, a long sleep, like a bear in hibernation for a whole year. Who knows? I don't know myself. And the scriptures does not go into that kind of detail for us. But it is a fascinating and interesting study. And we'll get into it, the Lord willing, tomorrow night. The Lord willing. Thank you for sharing with us. God bless you, and Pray for my friend, Brother Michael, his wonderful wife, Sister Jacqueline, and the family, the church at Dewa. Let there be revival, continuous revival. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you, Brother Michael.
Thank you. See you later.